All right. If we are to believe Hangouts on Air, we are live with Jeff Combos from Exile Game Studio. And how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We don't do too many interviews on the channel, but you know, just designers and writers who are near and dear to our hearts.
Oh, well, thank you.
I think anyone watching this channel over the years has heard an awful lot of mention of Ubiquity, of Hollow Earth Expedition, and the other games that followed suit. Desolation, All for One, Leagues of Adventure, and recently Space 1889. So you've set some pretty powerful stuff in motion with a pulp game. How do you feel about that?
Totally unintentional, I assure you.
So
Yeah.
right now, you are in the middle of your second Revelations of Mars Kickstarter,
That's right.
one for Perils of Mars. How's it going?
Amazing. I actually wanted to do Perils as a follow-up to the previous one, Revelations of Mars, mostly because there were a couple of things we didn't get to finish. Like the Revelations of Mars, that Kickstarter was by far the biggest Exile has had, and we got 3 adventures unlocked. And I thought, well, to put them in a book, we need one more. Let's do another Kickstarter, and we'll make it small, so we can churn it out pretty quickly. Revelations ran late, and I didn't want that again, so just put out what I thought was going to be a smaller Kickstarter, and we funded in an hour and 45 minutes. Reached the first stretch goal within 24 hours, and I haven't looked at it like in the last few minutes, but I think we're 316% funded right now. So yeah, It's been great.
Nicely
and
done.
Almost 3 weeks left to go. So we'll see where we get to.
Yes, that'll be pretty cool. I've got Revelations here, which we can't see because it's in the dark, but great hardcover. And the previous adventure Kickstarter, Perils of Mars, or Perils of the Surface World,
right?
Which was also a lot of fun, bringing together a lot of those classic adventures.
Right.
So, all right. Well, let's get into it. You said it was purely unintentional, Ubiquity and everything. So let's start there. What was the intention?
So actually, I just recently copped to this, that I started Exile in about 2003 was when I started the company, knowing that I wanted to do an RPG, knowing I wanted to do games. It's my mom's fault, by the way, that happened. But I knew I wanted to do that, and I thought, well, okay, I've done some freelance writing. I did some writing for White Wolf and some other things, but really, nobody knows me. And if I decide I'm going to put out a game, and it's a no-name game by a no-name person with a no-name system, which is what I was thinking about doing at the time, I thought no one's going to play it. Right? That seemed like the equation to me. So I thought, well, I'm actually going to try to get a licensed property so I could have it be something people had heard of. I spent almost a year actually chasing it, and it didn't work out, unfortunately. But the whole time I had this Hollow Earth Expedition game in the back of my head, and I thought, the more I thought, played with it, this seems like it has some legs. And I shared it with a few people and described it to them, and they kind of liked the idea, and the whole Nazis and dinosaurs thing seemed to be something that people resonated with. So I thought, okay, you know what? I really have nothing to lose. We're just going to go for it. And from that point on, I really didn't think too much about how it was going to be received as much as how closely did it align with what I was intending to do. And that meant I had to have a game system that did a few things a little differently, some things that I saw as being problematic, and I put that out there. And I admit that I had some hope that maybe I could do something more with it later. I didn't really think that other people would want to pick it up and run with it, but it was designed to kind of do that. In fact, the reason it's even called Ubiquity is because I wanted a game that you could even like LARP with. You could actually stand up away from the table and walk away and do some things. Those portions of the rules never got finished, but I had plenty on my plate to deal with. But yeah, that was kind of the idea, was just to make something that I could use that was close to what I was intending to do, And then it just sort of struck a chord, and then people started asking me if they could do things with the system, and it just sort of ran from there.
Was the first group to do that actually Gray Malkin Studios, who did
Yeah,
Desolation,
yeah.
or were there people before then?
No, it was pretty much the Gray Malkin guys, and I actually very clearly remember it was my good friend Sechin, who's edited and written for Hollow Earth Expedition, published a bunch of books on his own too, and he went and ran a game at Gen Con, which was the adventure that went with the original Game Master screen and to the Earth Score. And Matt Summers from Gray Malkin was in that game, followed him back to the booth, like asking him questions the whole way about how things work, could he get a copy of it, and kind of ran right into me, and we just started talking, and they just really ran with it. So yeah, they were definitely the first ones out of the gate.
Right. Followed by Triple Ace.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and Wiggy and
All for
Robin
one.
are awesome. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love those guys.
Yeah.
So they were actually the first ones to also say, well, we don't want to do just one game with it either. So
Oh,
they kind of negotiated a sort of a blanket license with me so they could do some other games. And actually, I initially gave them a few different properties. They had some ideas, and I said, okay, great, here you go. All for One was certainly one of them, and League's Adventure was one of them. And then there was one that the more I ended up thinking about it later, I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to want to do something with that one. So I ended up actually taking that one back from them. But
go
yeah,
back.
yeah,
Nice. But it was All for One that I stumbled across first, and within a few days, I had tracked down every Ubiquity release I could find. It set a fire under me. I'd kind of reached a
yeah.
point, you know.
That was the one where when they told me what they had in mind, I was sold. It was just, oh my gosh, yes, yeah,
Let's do that.
yeah. I'm in. I'm in.
So, how long did it take to go from I'm going to make Hollow Earth Expedition with some kind of system to actually having it ready to go?
Let's see, close to 2 years, I think. Not all of that was full time,
Right.
but yeah, probably close to 2 years. I think I really honed in on the concept and what the game was going to be about in 2004, sort of towards the end of 2004, and then asked some people in my friend group about some artists. I thought, well, I'm going to need a cover for this thing, and I think that having a cover that's really evocative, that really sells the idea of what this game is going to be a really good idea. So I'm going to see if I can find somebody good. And a friend of mine said he knew this guy named Stephen Daniele. And Stephen had worked at TSR, and he had a lot of experience in the RPG industry. He was doing some work for the video game industry here in Seattle. And they said, well, why don't you just meet for lunch? So set up a time, met with Stephen, told him I had this crazy idea about an RPG about feeding Nazis to dinosaurs. And Stephen looked at me across the table and said, what are you doing after lunch?
What are you doing after lunch?
Because I want to show you what I have been working on in my spare time. So I went back with Stephen to his studio, and on the walls surrounding his kind of workstation there, he had been drawing people riding flying dinosaurs for fun.
Right.
And at
That's the
that point,
perfect
I
guy.
knew this was the guy. So really, from that moment on, Stephen and I have been friends. Like not just we work together and do this, but yeah, we really connected. Even though he's moved away from Seattle, he's in Austin now. Yeah, so it's really been great. And the cover that he churned out is the Hollow Earth Expedition cover. So that started in 2004. He delivered it 2005-ish. Yeah, there we go.
This
And
cover.
yeah, and it's just, yeah, he just did such an amazing job on that.
Yeah. When I first saw this cover, I had no doubt that whoever put this game together had read the same stuff that I had watched the same stuff my dad made me watch. you know,
Yeah.
and I just rushed. I rushed to get it.
Yeah, that's
And I have not
exactly
been
what I
disappointed.
wanted the cover to do. And this has been, I I guess, a core principle of Hollow Earth Expedition from the beginning is it needs to be familiar but different. So you need to look at it and you need to think of all of the things that you read or saw or watched in that genre. But when you pick it up, you go, oh, that's different. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's a little, oh, I get that. And that's always, and that probably no book more than Revelations of Mars, I think, has really showcased that. Because there's lots of things I could do, like in Mysteries of the Hollow Earth. I actually resisted for the longest time even making a map of the Hollow Earth because I wanted it to be a playground for game masters. But people kept asking me for a map. So the map that's in Mysteries is my compromise, which is a map of the Hollow Earth with nothing on it.
With nothing on it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the best map ever.
Right. So yeah, okay, fine. Here's your map, everybody. But I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to, force you to say, oh, the Hawkmen are here and the, Gillmen are here. I didn't want that. So in some ways, it also allowed me to kind of hand wave some things and just say these are the elements, but I'm not putting them together in a way that is exactly like something else you've seen. But with Revelations, that was a whole different animal, and it's one of the reasons that book was, I mean, by far the hardest book I've put out. No doubt.
I bet.
Yeah.
Just reading it. when you first released the one for us to go through and check for typographical errors and things, I for a moment I sat there and thinking, I wonder how my game group will respond to a request to just cancel everything that we're playing and start this right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well, it sounds like you didn't have to find that out.
I didn't, but
Yeah. No, the reason why that was so difficult was the initial vision I had for that book. I actually put out. I brought sample characters to Gen Con one year, and I revealed the cover and I showed it to people, and I was really going for more Flash Gordon than John Carter of Mars.
right.
And I thought, okay, let's put this out there. And it just didn't work. I mean, it worked, but everybody kind of looked at it and thought, oh, that's really cool, but it seems a lot like the Hollow Earth. And I realized that what I was trying to go for was not my intention. So I had to take a step back and kind of reevaluate that a little bit. But the genre turned out to be this unexpected challenge because if you read the Lost World genre or any of the Hollow Earth stuff, Edgar Rice Burroughs, there's a lot of agreement with that material around what it looks like. Right? It's a jungle. It's sunny. There's dinosaurs. It's primitive peoples. And there's a lot you can do with that. When I went to the Sword and Planet genre, and in particular Mars, there's very little agreement about what that planet would look like, other than often it's a dying planet, so that part really holds true. But if you look at John Carter of Mars versus Flash Gordon versus, this is going ahead a little bit, but The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, there's really not a lot of agreement in the genre. So I kind of figured out that I was going to need to be really specific, and that meant trying to find the middle ground between a lot of these things. So yeah, it just took a lot of time. Look, it took a lot of time to get it right.
And well, we have a gushing review of it around here somewhere.
Somewhere, I think, yeah.
But one of the things that I really appreciate about it now is it's not exactly a toolkit, but it does provide you with tools. What do you want your robot wanderers to be like, and what powers are going to be represented, and if you're going to play some kind of multi-limbed alien being, exactly how do you want to tweak that? And that brings in a lot of fun from different areas that we hadn't seen, well, for a while, I guess, since Mysteries of the Hollow Earth, I guess, with the vast arrangement of animal people.
That's right. Yeah.
So what's pushing on you now? Once you get, Perils of Mars out of the way, what's next?
Yeah, so this is what's really interesting about Hollow Earth Expedition is there's a lot to work on still. Uh, there's a lot of properties. I've been fortunate enough to work not only in tabletop stuff, but in video games and some other stuff. And so I've worked on lots of different properties. And I think Hollow Earth Expedition has one of the biggest worlds. I mean, other than a game that actually has maybe infinite realities kind of things, but there really are three settings within this setting.
Right.
There's the surface world, the Hollow Earth, and Mars. So there's plenty of stories, infinite stories probably that you could tell within those three worlds. And I feel like we've only scratched the surface there. But at the same time, to get to the point where we're at now, where Revelations of Mars is out and Perils of Mars is coming out, that finally the shape of the game, all of the big umbrella pieces are what I had intended. I'm not even gonna say that. It's what I'd hoped. When I first came out with Hollow Earth Expedition, I thought of Mars. Like I had cut the pieces of this apart in the way that I did, but I
Right. Oh,
never,
right.
yeah, I never really let myself hope, or like in a real way that we would get there. I focused on, is this first book going to work? Are people going to like that? And then I've just sort of tried the next thing and the next thing, and to finally get to the point where everything is out that I had initially was hoped to get out is kind of amazing.
Yeah. The
But
industry can be kind of unforgiving, I think.
yeah,
Coming next year, and then you never
yeah,
hear from that company again.
that's
But
right. Yeah.
you
So
mentioned
so as far as what's pushing on me, there's a couple things. So the I definitely feel like there's more to be done with the setting, but also now that it's been done in sort of this uh, kind of piecemeal kind of way. Like if you go back and look at the original core rulebook, there's really no hint of Mars in it, right? There's not a lot of foreshadowing for what's to come. So it's possible to kind of look at the pieces and think, okay, they're maybe nesting like
right.
Russian nesting dolls, but they aren't cohesive in a way that if I had started out from scratch and really put them all together, they would be. So that's sort of appealing to me to kind of take another pass.
It's cool.
But
Now,
also, there's all kinds of requests for the rule system too. So, and I will admit I'm already working on a second edition of the Ubiquity rule system. So that's
so what would
definitely
that
happening.
what would that mean? What
Ah,
would
so
a second edition mean?
So here's the interesting thing about Ubiquity. It's 10 years old now,
Yeah.
which is crazy. And in fact, this year is Hollow Earth Expedition's 10th year. And at the time that I made it, I wanted a rule system that was light, that moved quickly, that didn't get in your way, could actually collapse out of your way. And those things are certainly true. But when you compare it now to game systems that have come since then, uh, it kind of no longer really hits that bar exactly right. It's grown. There's some crunchy bits in it now that I'm not sure totally need to be there, or that there are different
Right.
ways of solving the same problem. People have been asking me for a long time for a generic rule book for Ubiquity. So I thought if I was going to do that, that I would update the rule system and then do it. Um, but yeah, it's something I've been working on a little bit here and there, kind of in the background. I haven't decided exactly what format it's going to come out in or anything like that.
Right. Project for the far future.
Maybe not so far, but yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, you mentioned conventions early on.
Mhm.
What role have conventions played in how things were shaped piece by piece as each puzzle piece of
Mhm.
the game line came out, and how are they influencing your plans for the future?
Uh, so I love conventions, and I actually mentioned this I think online someplace recently that publishing RPGs, particularly in the tabletop realm, it can be a very solitary endeavor. Um, I joked a lot while working on Revelations about actually being on Mars. That I had actually kind of, and part of the joke was I actually waited a while to go see the movie The Martian because it was going to take a little while before the idea of seeing some guy trapped for an indeterminate period of time on the red planet was going to seem entertaining to me. But when I go to conventions, it's when I really, really connect with the people who are playing the game. I mean, I talk to people, email back and forth. I talk to people on the phone. I get various feedback. I hear stories about people's games. I listen to podcasts. If people put up an actual play recording, I'm almost guaranteed to listen to it. It's good stuff, but it's not until I get to a convention that I really see how people connect with it in a broader sense, and it never fails to send me home charged. I want to like jump into my chair and start working on things when I come home. And I've been going to conventions like Gen Con for so long that there are friends that I've made in Indianapolis, outside Indianapolis, that I see there every year. Yeah, it's really cool. I really like going to conventions.
So, what is your presence at a convention? Something at one of the bigger conventions like Gen Con. What does Exile do?
So I have a booth at Gen Con, and in fact, I have a corner booth. I've managed to kind of squat on a corner booth for several years now, and so people can generally find me on one of the interior walkways. They'll find the Exile booth. Like this year, it'll be all decked out for Mars again, so all I have to do is look for all of the red, and they'll come find us. But we actually, one year, I think it was the year that we were doing mysteries. And Gen Con was really just starting to grow. I sprang for a double booth. It was actually a 10 by 20, and we had gotten on sale this gazebo that kind of looked sort of explorer tent-like. And so we set up everything in there, so you would kind of walk into the tent and look around and find all the books and things. And as just a fun little convention game, I had bought a replica of the idol from the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we had built a little pedestal, and on the pedestal was a scale. It was actually kind of built into it, and if you stood behind the pedestal, you could see the number. So what we would do is we'd put the idol on it, and then people could come and scoop out dice and style chips out of this big bucket and throw them into a bag to try to guess the weight. And so then they would take the idol off and put the bag on, and we would record how close they were to the actual weight, and whoever at the end of the convention had the closest weight, they actually got the idol. So and we sent it home with somebody, and
That's awesome.
and that's certainly the biggest to-do we've ever done. We've really scaled back from that because even at a convention like Gen Con, it's a struggle to break even.
Right.
Like it's kind of more marketing than necessarily sales. So yeah, we scaled back a little bit. We tend to do the single 10 by 10 booth, but instead of going crazy with the booth, we do games every year. And we've got this really great program where people come and they run games officially for Exile, and we take good care of them. We give out these little game master kind of support kits that often have like water and throat lozenges and stuff. So we do that. And then for every game that's run, we hand out comment cards to all the players. So game masters will also get feedback on how they did. And so we'll know like who we should invite back the next year, and they'll get specific comments about some things that they really liked or really didn't. Those comment cards get dropped off at the booth, so they go out with people, and then that encourages the feedback loop, right? So the comment card tells people exactly where we are. They'll come and find us. They'll tell us how the game was. We'll collect those cards, and then at the end of the convention, we actually tally everybody's scores up, and we actually give out an award to the Game Master of the Year. We've been doing that for maybe 6 or 7 years now, I think.
Now, last year, wasn't this some kind of giant, kind of prehistoric jawbone looking thing?
Well, so we've been doing this for Game Masters for so long that two guys that help me run the convention. So Sean Hilton, who's amazing, and then Keith, who has actually been our Game Master of the Year for 2 years running now. They came up with this idea to do a tournament for players. And so they ran this tournament, and that skull was actually the prize for kind of the MVP for all of the Hollow Earth games for that year.
Excellent.
Yeah, it was pretty
The
cool.
Den of Ubiquity.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so now the Den of Ubiquity is something else, and that is on Friday night. This will be our third year doing it. We get as many people running Ubiquity games in one room, and just play for 4 or 5, 6 hours sometimes, and just it's everything. I think last year there was a Doctor Who Ubiquity game. There was a Futurama Ubiquity game. Um, yeah, people, it just was really neat to see what people were doing with it. Yeah.
Well, it is really flexible. I had tried to do Cthulhu Tech as a play by
Oh,
email game, which was maybe the worst decision I've ever made for play by email. The heaviest system, that one man alone thing that you mentioned earlier, that was me
yes.
rolling dice by myself for hours.
Yeah.
And then I flipped it to Ubiquity, and
Mhm.
it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is what
Mu
fun is.
much easier to do it that way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's been
so
fun to see what people do.
very cool. So when you are not, you know, out in public representing Exile and
Mhm.
Ubiquity games,
Mhm.
what games do you play, or do you have time?
So I'm the proverbial cobbler's wife. So yeah. So if people don't know, so the cobbler's wife goes barefoot because he's always making shoes for other people, which is a very old, outdated, and sexist metaphor these days. But the core of it's the same, which is that I sadly do not get enough time to play games as I would like because I'm too busy making them.
Right.
And the same is true with video games. A good friend of mine who was at Microsoft for many years, and we were there at the same time, had a similar problem. So what we would do is we would take video games that we'd picked up that we knew we were interested in, and we would both create a stack. And when that stack got high enough, we would schedule a game day. So probably at least once every 3 to maybe 6 months, we would set aside a Saturday, and it was not uncommon for us to play for 12 to 14 hours. And we would show up and we would just start burning through our stacks.
Right.
And sometimes we were not too kind. Some games got 10 minutes of our
Right.
time, and others did not. But we needed to be able to see what was out there, and we're often surprised at the games that caught our attention, and we ended up spending a lot of time with. Um, Now in the tabletop, sphere, I've been doing a lot of card games recently. Those are easy to kind of pop in and pop out of. I have a lot of board games, and in fact, some good friends of mine here in Seattle, we do a little mini convention between Christmas and New Year's every year where we kind of all descend on somebody's house and we all
Mm.
move in, and different people take care of dinner every night, and we just play games. So we go through a lot of different games during that week, and so I'm probably better off than normal on some new stuff that's come out. So
Excellent.
yeah. Mhm.
All right. What did you grow up playing? What tabletop games did you start with?
D&D was my first. I was probably 6 or 8, I think, maybe 8, when I played my first D&D game, a Half Elf Fighter, and
Mm.
that was eye opening for me. It was my older siblings that kind of got me into that, and they sort of lost interest and got more interested in other stuff, and I never lost interest in it, and it just really hooked me and stayed with me for a long time. And I grew up at a time when D&D was satanic. Like, it was not a good
Yes.
thing to be involved with. But I didn't really care. Like, I think I knew that what it really was, and stuck with it. And then in high school, I started to play other things. So kind of junior high, there was BattleTech and
Yes.
Champions, and there was some Traveler in there. I mean, there was Gamma World. There's kind of everything in that range. And then in high school, we actually had a science fiction and fantasy club,
Hmm.
um, and as if publishing my own RPG is not geeky enough. Uh, over the course of 3 years, I was the secretary, vice president, and my senior year, I was the president of the science fiction and fantasy club, and that mostly was a excuse for us to get together at lunch every day and play games. And
Sure.
played a lot of Shadowrun in high school. Definitely a lot of Shadowrun, and I remember going into like the local game store and kind of looking around for new things like I always did. And I looked down and I saw the very first soft cover Vampire the Masquerade book. They'd put it on the bottom shelf because they really didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
And I picked it
The
up,
art
and
in
I
that was
think
kind of shocking.
it really was. But I think that there it was a really good example of what my friend Sechin has accused me rightly of, which is he's like, you don't collect games, you collect systems. And he's right. So I tend to be very like experimental. And so I remember running my very first vampire game with my group of friends who'd been playing Shadowrun and other stuff with me for a long time, and they just did not know what to make of that game. Um, yeah, so I just kind of continued on from there, just trying all kinds of different things.
Was Shadowrun where I guess maybe the attraction to dice pools came from?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some things that I didn't like about that dice pool system, and you see my attempts to fix them with Ubiquity. The same
Right.
thing's true with the storyteller system, the early White Wolf stuff.
Right.
There's certainly
Variable
games
target
like,
numbers and yeah.
yeah, variable target numbers I didn't like. It just made things complex. Made it hard to really know if your character was good at anything kind of ahead of time.
Right.
And so I didn't like that. I mean, at the time, this was all revolutionary, but it just kind of didn't sit right with me. So yeah, so I tried to fix those things. And so less dice, less often is kind of the watchwords for Ubiquity. And
Right.
that's ironically how I ended up making my own dice.
Right.
Also not intended. Not intended.
Right. Best intentions and all that. But
Yeah.
one of the cool things I like about Ubiquity's ability to give you the choice of rolling dice or not rolling dice is that when you choose to take the average, when you choose not to roll,
Hmm.
it doesn't feel like you're just hand waving success.
Right.
You know, it's
Yeah.
like it's still based on who your character is. It just makes it really explicit, that old rule of if it falls within your capacity as a person with this skill, you can do it.
That's right. I mean,
The most
on some
misunderstood part of it.
at some level, we're all playing make believe, right?
Right.
Uh, so I've definitely run into people who are like, well, why do dice really matter? And we've seen games that are diceless, right? And that's yeah, it's something about having the mechanics there that really, I don't know, it adds some of the risk to it because you're giving up some of your narrative agency to the roll of a die.
Right.
And once you start taking that away, right, in any way, just hand waving something, it sort of cheapens the experience in some way for a lot of people.
Right.
Not everybody, but
Not everybody.
that's something I've noticed with a kind of a general group of people. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a way where if I was at a table with a very narrative person and somebody who might be considered a rules lawyer, that I could kind of wave my hands and have the rules lawyer go, I'm okay with that.
Right.
And
You've
that's
obeyed the rules.
really like the kind of the emotional target I was trying to hit with that. But I usually just tell people that the rules are designed to collapse out of your way without breaking and without messing with kind of the statistical outcome.
Right. Nice. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Mhm.
At conventions and things, you must have to introduce the game to people who haven't seen it before.
Yes.
How do you go about that? You're kind of close to the problem, I guess you'd say.
I am, and I find that the more I talked about it, the clearer certain things got for me. Like I'd initially had to take the average thing in there, so you did not have to roll dice as often. But it wasn't until, even though I was playing the game a lot and playing the game with people, it wasn't until I was really talking it through with newer people over and over again that it actually occurred to me to just never roll dice. So so now, like when I run my game, I never roll dice ever. I make all my players do it because they like it and it's fun. But I may have 12 NPCs I need to take care of, and who wants to listen to me
Exactly.
rolling dice, right? So, and so it also what it does is that frees me up to do things like have my NPCs act intelligently, right? So like,
Right.
oh, well, I know his average on his firearm skill, he's got 3 successes. That's not really doing much. But if I have him jump up on a table to get a better angle on people, and then he goes fully automatic, I know that that bumps his average to a 4.
Right.
So, so now I'm narrating something that's totally different than just he fires at you, right? So, and then I roll a die. So it's like that to me felt better. But it wasn't until I started talking it through with people that some of that stuff really came to the fore. And so I do tend to talk to people in one of 2 ways. If they're a narrative person, I will talk about the style points, the motivations, the flaws, the way that the sort of narrative heart of the game runs. If somebody's a bit more mechanical or cares about the crunchy bits, I'll tend to talk about the dice and the not rolling them and rolling them, the way that you can change outcomes with style points and things like that. And if somebody's really interested in one or the other, then I'll bring in the other piece, whichever one that I haven't talked about yet.
Right. I think another attractive point to the system was that you could play. I don't know quite how to phrase it. You could play, let's say, an intelligent character who winds up being able to express themselves throughout the system with their intelligence. They could learn to fight using their intelligence, or they could learn to negotiate through their intelligence and whatnot, rather than having to be good at everything, which was kind of a symptom of a lot of games of a certain period of time. You know, I haven't taken any
Yeah,
wealth, so I'm homeless.
yeah, oh, yeah. Well, actually, what you just described is a risk that I took with Hollow Earth Expedition on purpose. I knew what I was doing, and I did take some criticism for it, but not a lot. Which is, if you look at the pulp genre, in fiction and literature, a lot of those famous characters are really good at almost everything. Right,
Mm.
or just have a wide range of skills with a really good. Doc Savage is a really good example.
Doc Savage is
Uh,
the key, but
yeah,
the
so
spider and the shadow very close.
but if you sit down to play a game with with him, everybody else is not really going to measure up. And how fun is that to be, you know, not him? So I thought, all right, we need to specialize. So I intentionally kind of dialed back the power level. So people making characters would have to pick and choose the things that they were going to be good at. And initially, people thought that the game was a little too low fantasy, that the characters felt a little underpowered. So what I did is I went to Gen Con the next year and I ran a game called League of Extraordinary Pulp. And I cranked the power level on all the characters kind of up to 11. And so what I did is I had Indiana Jones, Doc Savage, the Rocketeer, Mandrake the Magician. Who am I forgetting? The Phantom.
The Phantom, of course.
I'm missing somebody. The Shadow, I think, is the one I was missing. So 6 of these very famous characters, and I cranked them all up. If you're familiar with the system out there, I think I made them all as maybe Mentor 5 level characters, like they're kind of topped out, and then I ran them through an adventure where they got accidentally kicked through time to the far future, 1966, and they kind of come out of that in New York to find that the Nazis had won, since they had left the past, that the Nazis had won. And so now they were in this dystopian future and had to figure out how to get home and then stop what had happened. And of course, over that time, other things had happened. I think I I'd created fake newspaper articles that kind of explained what happened to each one of them. And
Nice.
I believe Indiana Jones, I think, was executed for being a grave robber. Just yeah, so and then they had to go back and they kind of had to save the world, and it worked great. And I've just never had anybody really complain about power level in the game since.
Yeah, it's the very first time I ran it just as a play test, I thought, I'm going to try and overwhelm myself. So I gave two competing like Shanghai street gangs
Mm-hmm.
in a dive bar. I had a bar fight going on upstairs. The floor collapsed, and that bar fight fell in the middle of my bar fight. And I only had two player characters having to deal with this whole mess. And we
Mm-hmm.
plowed all the way through it. It only took 30 minutes. I was thinking we'd been rolling dice for an hour or 2 hours or something like that. When I checked the times, like, we did this in 30 minutes. This is my favorite game ever.
Yeah, well, so I do things at Gen Con. So you asked about this, and I guess I didn't think about this at the time, but I do experiment at conventions. And one year, I wanted to see how big we could go. So I went to one of our game masters who I think admittedly is very proficient. And I said, how many players can you have at a table at once? Like, we're going to do a combat, like a big combat. How many people do you think you could handle? And then we tried to get that number and more. So he ended up with 11 people at this big long table that we had got at one of the restaurants, and I had him run a half an hour combat. Like that's it. How many people can you run, and can you finish the combat in a half an hour? And he sure did. Like it was pretty surprising. He did a great job with that.
It'll blow your hair back.
Yeah,
How fast it is.
absolutely. And so I have a standing offer with people here in Seattle that if you have a D&D group or whatever your local gaming group happens to be playing, and you hit like a natural breaking point, or you just want to do something different, I will come in and I will run a one shot of my game for you guys. And I've done this a lot. And usually what I'll do is I'll come in, and if it's a D&D group, I'll say, how long do you guys usually play for? They'll say, 2.5, maybe 3 hours. Depends on how much we talk. And so, okay, well, in that 2.5 to 3 hours, how much will you play? Like, will you do an encounter, maybe 2 encounters? And I'm like, yeah, that's usually about it. And I'll say, great, we're going to run an entire adventure start to finish in 2 hours. Let's go. And and by the way, I'm also going to teach you the rules. And they usually kind of look at me funny, and then they look at their watches at the end, because we're usually done right about 2.5 hours. So
Right.
I love doing that. And then it just mic drop. Thank you. Bye bye. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
I don't
fun.
know. Yeah, that's just fun for me. I really like that.
Yeah. And without really scrimping on let's say the meat of combat, all the special tricks that you can do, and then branching out into more descriptive or narrative applications of the rules. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there, but yeah,
Yeah, it's
D&D.
yeah, and by the way, that is nothing against D&D. I mean, I was
No,
just using that as an example. Love D&D, play it. I actually really like 5th edition. So, yeah, it just happens to be a good example that lots of people play. But I also find that working on a 2nd edition of the Ubiquity rule set, there's definitely some things I want to change, but there's some things that people are really attached to that I don't want to mess up.
I bet.
So yeah, I think it's something I'm going to have to put out and have lots of people try and test out, and really make sure that it still has the same core to it that it has before. Because I do want to make some significant changes.
Sure.
I think there's too many attributes. Like, for example, like
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, but it is funny how attached people get. I mean, I'm struggling with the new edition of Call of Cthulhu.
Mhm.
I've been playing it far too long without it ever having changed. It's one of the
Yeah.
foundation blocks of who I am as a game master, and now they've changed it, and I really want to like it, but there's a part of me that says, why have you changed my baby, kind of thing,
Yeah.
and it's ridiculous. I should just be able to embrace it and go, but you
Well,
do get attached to things.
you do, and yeah. So I want to not break things, but I do want to make them better.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll look forward to that. You must have met a lot of colorful characters over the years,
Hmm.
uh, with the grounding in pulp games and the convention setting and so on.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've met some really, really wonderful people. If so, you've heard the saying, right? The way to make $1 million in the gaming industry is to start with 2 million. Um,
Yes.
uh, so, like, believe me, this whole thing is much more of a um, passion project than something that really pays all the bills.
Sure.
Uh, and if that's all it ever is, I will feel rich just in the people I've met through this. Just some absolutely amazing players and people who I consider friends that I met across a table at a convention
Right.
one day. Yeah, just some absolutely amazing people that are really, I've seen them there for each other. Um, just some really, really great stuff. Now, with that being said, there are some pretty interesting people I've met. Uh, my game's about the Hollow Earth, and every once in a while I will run into a true believer, and
Ah, yes.
that those aren't very common. There's a Facebook group, the Hollow Earth Explorers Facebook group. I actually defend that pretty aggressively. There's all kinds of kind of true believers who will try to join that group just because they see the name and they don't read the full description.
Right.
So I actually I really look at people's profiles and do that. Try to make sure that we get some actual people interested in the game that are in there and not
Right.
dilute it. But I did have a guy email me out of the blue or message me on Facebook that actually said Jeff Combos did not write Hollow Earth Expedition and he knows it. It's like, actually, I did, and I don't, so I don't know what's going on here. But I know better than to respond. So, but I looked
Right.
at his page, and sure enough, he sort of fell into that true believer category. But I figured better just ignore it. And then probably a week or two later, he messaged me again, and this time he said, "Do you remember that conversation you had with somebody about composting?" I remember that and more. It's like, I have no idea what this person's talking about. No idea.
That is.
So yeah, yeah, colorful characters for sure. But I've met some colorful people who I'm really fortunate to have run into. Kevin Cook. So
Hmm.
Kevin Cook is the Guinness Book World Record holder for the largest dice collection,
Good Lord.
and I met him the very first year I put out Hollow Earth Expedition. So I guess this will be 10 years ago this year. But he walks around the convention and he has this top hat that he wears that actually is a spring on the top with a D20 that kind of like bounces back and forth. You can't miss the guy. And I watched him come by the booth, kind of looks down, sees the Ubiquity dice,
Right.
and then kind of turns around because they just look like D8s. And even just casually, the guy's so keyed into this. I see him do a literal stop and like back up in place, and then he turns and he goes, "What are those?" Well, those are my dice. Uh, those are kind of a binomial distribution thing. I mean, I can explain them to you. Weirdly enough, I actually have a patent on those dice. And he goes, "No, you don't." Actually, I do. And so I pulled him out and I showed it to him. And the reason why he had said no was because he actually knows the patent people. And so when new things come through for new dice, like they're supposed to let him know so he can kind of track them down and make sure he gets them in his collection. And
Right.
for
Sure.
whatever reason, mine slipped through the cracks. And
Wow.
so we struck up a conversation, and I got to tell him all about it. And I mean, every single year, he comes by the booth. He'll often email me before the convention to say, "You got anything new coming out?" When the new Revelations dice came out, I just gave him a set for his collection. And this is a weird tangent. I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but I didn't intend as a person putting out a pulp RPG to know so much about manufacturing custom dice, but I do, and I'm now connected to people who make unusual dice,
Right.
and so in him in particular, and I've actually been for several years now trying to make a 32-sided die. Um,
Ah,
I think it would just be fun. I think it would be kind of a cool novelty to be like, oh yeah, because Ubiquity dice, 1, 2, 3, and I think it would be great to go to a 5, and it would kind of match the way I do style chips, and I thought it would be great. Um, 32
it'd be a
sides,
terrible
although it
compulsion for us.
sounds right, right? It sounds like that should be no big deal, but it's not a platonic solid. So,
Right.
and keep in mind, I was terrible at geometry in school. Probability and statistics, great. Geometry, not so good. So this is kind of new for me, but yeah. So there, if you look at kind of unusual dice, it goes a 30-sided, a 34. Like it skips 32. Like who needs 34? It doesn't make any sense. Well, turns out that there really isn't a good 32-sided die. However, in my research, I had found that in the 20s, there was a Czechoslovakian roulette die that was 32 sides, and it was made out of glass. So I
That's
was
perfect.
desperate. I was desperate to see how they did this, and had gone onto eBay and was trying to find people who were selling them. And maybe once a month or so, like something would pop up, and they would go for 50 or 60 bucks sometimes. So I just wasn't able to get my hands on one. And I thought, Kevin. So I emailed Kevin and I said, I'm looking for a glass Czechoslovakian roulette die. And he said, I have 3. So, so I asked him to send me a couple of pictures and describe to me how they worked, and yeah. So like just because of that random sort of situation, like because my dice slipped through the cracks, because he didn't know that they were there, we had a conversation and we connected, and yeah. So like a colorful character that.
Awesome.
I've handed him dice, and he's helped me answer questions, and incidentally, that 32-sided die is totally not going to work. Yeah,
Well, at least
the
now
yeah.
you know. One
Yeah,
mystery.
the one of the numbers is the wrong size. So yeah.
Uh, I did get a question on our Facebook group
Oh yeah.
about the dice,
Yes.
the creation of the dice originally with the numbers. Richard Wentworth asked if uh, the new dice have symbols, right? The
Yeah.
Revelations dice have blasters and swords, but the original dice are numbered.
Hmm.
And had you considered a pulp theme like fists or something beforehand, or you know, how did you come up with the red, white, and blue numbered dice?
Right. Well, again, I didn't really set out to make dice. I didn't set out to have a patent, like a dice patent for this stuff. What I ended up doing was, as a designer, I tend to be very practical, which is I figure out what a problem is, and then I start looking at different ways to solve that problem, or occasionally go the other way, where I collect systems, right? So I will see different things and how they work, and then I'll think about ways I might apply that to something later. So I kind of tend to do that. So I was trying to figure out this less dice, less often thing, and I knew that with taking the average, I could solve the less often problem. But I also wanted to do less dice. I liked a nice like 1 to 10 scale for skills. It's intuitive for most people,
Right.
but I mean, if you go over that, you're into the 12 or 14 numbers, and even 8 dice can feel like a lot. So I thought, let's see if there's some way I can do this. So I started going into various math and binomial distribution, which is a way of kind of calculating coin flips and things, and
Right.
I love statistics and probability. I always have. In college, I was forced to take a math for liberal arts majors class, and I tried desperately to not take that class, but they forced me to. So I got 106 in that class. So they were it was very liberal math, is what that means. Not, you know. But anyway, so binomial distribution, and I was trying to figure out how to do this, and figure out ways of. I wasn't even thinking about dice at the time. I was just sort of thinking about how I could find a distribution curve for the way successes are calculated, et cetera, for a dice pool. And then I started seeing the pattern, and I started seeing that it followed a 1, 2, 4, 8 sort of thing. And I thought, okay, if I apply this to an 8-sided die, I can actually roll up to 1/3 less dice. And then as long as I do all the calculations ahead of time, then you don't have to parse the dice pool yourself. You can just add up the numbers that you see. So I wasn't thinking about symbols at that point. I was thinking, how do we make this easy for people to just, add? I don't personally like making people do multiplication or division at a game, like in a game at the table. And it doesn't mean I don't like complexity, but I want the complexity to be done either by me before I write the rule book. So things happen, and if you really sit there and kind of break it down, you can see what I did. Like I don't mind that, but at the table, I want addition and subtraction primarily. Like I want it to be fast. So this is kind of what I did, and I thought, all right, well, I figured out I can do this with dice. Great, I'm just going to buy those dice, because there is no possible way that I'm the first person to have thought of this. And actually, I still think that's the case. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have thought of this. And so I picked up the phone and I called our local math store, because we actually have a math store here in Seattle. And I described what it was I was looking for, and they said, "We don't know what you're talking about." And so then I started doing a bunch more research and found that indeed, if somebody had applied these two things, they certainly had not taken it the next step to actually make the dice. And I thought, how often does that happen? So I kind of, through a family member, knew somebody who did some patent stuff. So he gave me a good deal on the paperwork. And so I did that and contacted Chessex and made the
And the
dice.
rest is
But
history.
yeah, I mean, at the time it was again, it was sort of hedging my bets a little bit, that if Ubiquity had a broader appeal, I would want the dice to be more generic, right? That I would be able to use them for multiple games. Or if Hollow Earth didn't go anywhere, then I could sell them to that math store that could do educational stuff with them or whatever. So
They
that
probably wouldn't be interested in a die with a big fist on it.
right. So no, I actually didn't really consider putting symbols on them initially. I really just wanted them to be dice. Now the color scheme, on the other hand, now that was purely game related, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to have an easy way for people to look at them and see that they're different. I picked colors that would work mostly for people who would have color blindness. Usually red blue is pretty okay. And then I looked at poker chips. And poker chips are often in a white, red, blue increasing denomination. And I had already had the thought about doing poker chips. And so I thought, if I match the two, you will always have that kind of reinforced connection when you play the game. So that's how the color scheme happened. That's how I ended up with numbers and not the symbols. But so over the years, people have asked me for different colored Ubiquity dice, and that means breaking those two things apart, which I'm much more okay with today than I was back then, because I thought that was really a fundamental thing for a while. So I got to do the Revelations dice, and that's when we threw everything out the window and we said, we're going to do all symbols. And I was very lucky to have a very talented artist that I worked with in the video game industry who actually did the design of not just the Revelations dice, but he did some Hollow Earth dice for me. He did some what we called Atlantean dice that had kind of weird symbols on them, and some other things. So I had him do a bunch of designs, and we did the Revelations dice. And what I found is there is a reason why nobody really does dice this way, or they're not very common, which is when you replace all of your symbols or all of the numbers with symbols, every like facet, every side of your die is more or less unique. So that means that you can't go to a company like Chessex or Koplau or whatever, somebody who actually will do custom dice, because mostly what they do is they take a blank or they'll replace one face on a die. So when I talk to Chessex, who make my current dice, love them, they're great people, and I said, I want to do this D8 that has symbols all over it, so we'll just take a blank and we'll just laser etch it. They were like, yeah, that's going to be like $1 a face. Like
Yeah.
it's like the technology just wasn't there. So you have to do a mold, and then you have to make them. Q Workshop is one of the only companies that's really doing that work. It took them forever to do my set of dice, and partially that was because the technology was still fairly new, so they kept having to buy new pieces of equipment to do what needs to be done, and at the volume that I was after. And then by the time they got some new equipment in, it was also the summertime, and then they tried doing it, and it melted the dice. So yeah, so that was a problem,
The
and
hot winds of Mars.
yeah, so I actually can't say at this point that I would do a completely symbol-based die again until the technology gets better.
Right.
There is a company here local to Seattle called Glowforge that is making a kind of desktop-sized laser etcher for about, I think it's about $2,500 that they, I think, are selling those for. And that got me pretty excited for a minute, because I thought, well, you could create a tray with dice and then they could just kind of etch all the sides, turn them and etch them. But it has no hood for evacuating noxious fumes. And most of and so most of the plastic that this is what I'm talking about. I know way more about
Right.
like making custom dice than I should.
Game
Um,
developer killed while bringing joy to millions.
right, right. So yeah, but I do love the symbols. I think it's a possibility that I might go the route again where you do replace a face, but it doesn't quite work with Ubiquity dice. Right there.
Right.
What does a fist mean? Right, give me 3 fists.
Oh,
That
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Two final questions.
All right.
One, if someone out there is inspired, they have a game idea, they don't have a system, they would like to get in touch with you about using Ubiquity, how does that happen?
So I've had people email me, people pull me aside at conventions. Uh, I think one time, a long time ago, I had somebody call me, leave a message on the kind of the business line, and so carrier pigeon, like anyway. Uh, and mostly people will say exactly this, which is, I got a game idea and I think Ubiquity would be great for it, or I would really like to use Ubiquity for it. So my response to that is great, uh, just from a sense of, I'm a big fan of people putting out games. And I said this very early on. I still think it's true that when I go to a convention, really what separates me from the person I'm talking to is the table. Like I'm just a guy who had a crazy idea about feeding Nazis to dinosaurs and not enough sense to not do it. Like I just did it. I'm joking, but I'm also not joking. Like it wasn't until the night before Gen Con in 2006 that I even got nervous, because I was so focused on just getting it out and making it the way I wanted it to, that I just didn't have the brain power to stop to think about whether people would like it. I just didn't have time to be afraid. Like there's so much to do and so much to learn. Yeah, and so I was really relieved the next day. But that was just, it was hard to go to sleep that night. But really, that's it. Like, you have a great game idea and you have the ability to do it, or you want to learn how to do it, then awesome. Because you may find there's a lot more people like you out there. So I often will be very encouraging of people, but I will ask them to tell me about their game. And I tend not to ask them about mechanics first. Instead, I ask them to tell me about their concept, their setting, what's exciting about it. Because
What would
I want to
people
see that
do?
they have passion, right? I want to see that they're excited about it, because that'll increase the likelihood that their game will come out. And then I have to take that concept and then look at who else has Ubiquity licenses and make sure that it's not going to conflict. And every once in a while, I'll have to tell somebody no, just because somebody else has a license already. And there's been a couple of times that people have had a license for a year or two, and then it reverts back to me because they didn't do anything with it. But I try to minimize that as much as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds
Yeah.
well planned.
That is one I've put some thought into. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Last thing, the
All right.
Kickstarter,
Yes.
Revelations or Perils of
Perils of Mars.
Mars for Revelations of Mars. Could you briefly tell us about the 3 existing adventures
Yeah.
and whatever stretch goals that are pending for the next couple of weeks?
So yeah. So I think when we get to the end, I'm going to tell you about a stretch goal that I haven't talked about yet, but I'm going to talk
Cool.
about it a little kind of exclusively here. So you'll get, and the people who watch this will get to hear a little bit more about it, but then other people would normally. But so Perils of Mars is a collection of 4 adventures, just like Perils of the Surface World. We created these 4 adventures that are jumbo size. They're maybe 5 hours of gameplay, which, keep in mind for us, it's 5 hours, but we pack a lot into 2.5. So like
Right.
that's a couple of movies worth in here. So, and we do it so that way you could play 2.5 hours, have a nice cliffhanger break, come back the next week and finish it off. And so we try to give you a lot of content, make it interesting, but each one of the adventures has to expand the setting a little bit
Mm.
because, like I mentioned, there's a lot to cover, and we can't fit everything in the book, and I may not get to go into detail as much as I want on certain things. So this is our chance to do that. I also am somewhat careful about what I put in source books because people tend to take that as canon
Right.
if it's in a source book, but in an adventure, more fast and loose, right? Like the adventure that's going to come with a new game master screen. I mean, has the Earth being attacked with like an energy beam from Mars, and it's kind of destroying the planet. Like that's totally not canon, but it's an adventure, and people are cool with that. Like they get that. So so we kind of do more interesting things. We do try to expand the setting a little bit, and then we give people new rules. And so that's also kind of coming true with Perils of Mars. So in the Surface World game, we gave you some sanity rules. We
Which are
gave you
great, by the way.
some martial arts stuff. Quantum Black, which is a licensee, Ubiquity licensee, they're doing some really interesting things with the sanity. I think they kind of took my really rough idea and I think have really worked on it, and improved it. So so that's interesting. But so with Perils of Mars, we are expanding one of the moons of Mars. And we're actually going to reveal a couple of the secrets and mysteries that we set up in Revelations. That there is how much I want to give away.
There's a something.
Let, let's just say it's going to be, you're going to be able to get to the moon without a rocket. So there's a connection there. So that's one thing. So we're going to do the moon. That'll be a brand new setting. One of my favorite little things that I had put in as a story seed in Revelations is about Captain Kerr. And Captain Kerr was the very first sky pirate, and he kind of came to power in the vacuum when all of the Atlanteans sort of went to sleep and kind of fell into slumber. So he sort of jumped into that and was kind of collecting all of their artifacts and making hoards out of them, and sort of overstepped his bounds. And one of the Atlantean Karns, kind of their avatars, reappeared and smote him down. But his treasure trove was still out there, and people have been searching for it for like a millennia, and nobody's found it yet. So one of the adventures will be the search for his treasure. So that I'm really
Excellent.
looking forward to that one. That'll be fun. We're doing that one, the moon. We're going to do a city. So the Mars that you get in Revelations is sort of the remnants of what used to be there. So that means there's a lot of stuff that has come before. And one of those things is a city that was swallowed by the planet. Again, they sort of overstepped their bounds, and that's sort of the superstition that the planet sort of sucked it under. Well, now that after all these years, it's sort of reappeared again. There's been a lot of erosion and some other things, and so it's sort of risen back up out of the dust and sort of the things that it had taken to the ground with it are now exposed to the air. So we're gonna kind of do some of that ones too. So yeah, it's gonna be definitely a fun book. And thanks to the Kickstarter, we're going to add 4 new sample characters, and those are going to be fun to work on. We actually tonight I'm going to finish working on some of the art orders for a couple of those guys, and yeah, it's really going to be fun. I really like that one.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time with us away from all of these projects to
Sure.
talk to
Yeah.
us. It was nice to meet you in this way.
Yeah. Oh, I promised you stretch goals.
Yeah, right.
Oh, so yeah, I just don't want to go back on my promise. So we've done so well with Perils that we have unlocked not only the stretch goals that I had hoped for the Perils book, but we're actually have gone a step back and are now improving a couple of things for Perils of the Surface World that we didn't get to do. So we are maybe, I think we're maybe $1,500, less than $1,500 from the next stretch goal that will unlock color versions of those sample characters that we will turn into a set of style chips, which I didn't get to do because Perils of the Surface World was my second Kickstarter. And then there is the next one. And so the next one I haven't announced yet. It's a bigger goal. There's a bigger chunk there because what I'm having in mind, and I've been talking to people about doing this, is something that will not only work for Perils, but any Ubiquity game. And that actually is some redesigned Ubiquity dice.
Dun dun.
Mm-hmm.
You heard it here first.
Yeah,
Very
so
cool.
I will definitely tell more about that on the Kickstarter and online. But yeah, how could you possibly redesign those dice? Well,
That's the question that's swirling in my head right now.
Exactly.
All right. Have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is awesome.
My pleasure. It's great to meet you. And to all of you who have been watching us, we have been me and Jeff Combos from Exile Games, the creator of Hollow Earth Expedition. Take care, everyone.